Hey, what's going on, Guardians? My name is The Black Link, and today is Thursday, November 12th, 2020, the first Thursday after the official release of Destiny 2 Beyond Light. And of course, with it being a Thursday, you know what that means. It's time for another issue of the Bungie Weekly Blog, This Week at Bungie. And this week is going to be a little bit interesting. Unsurprisingly, as the general rule of thumb goes, since we had an expansion drop this week, of course we had patch notes drop alongside that expansion, the TWAB this week is notoriously light on information. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time towards the end of this video talking a bit about Beyond Light itself, what I like thus far, and a few things that I do hope get changed sooner rather than later. But of course, a lot of you Guardians are out there in Beyond Light playing on Europa in the new content or chilling in the Cosmodrome utilizing your brand new Stasis powers. And really, Stasis is the name of the game when it comes to this week's TWAB. As really, the most noteworthy part of the TWAB is really just explaining some of the finer details about how Stasis is going to work both as an asset for players to use and as a hindrance when it's being used against you. In a section titled, Fine, It's Cosmic Ice, here's what Bungie had to say. We are seeing many Guardians out in the wild who have claimed Stasis as their own and embraced a pathway to many abilities, some considered to be unnatural. There are many aspects and fragments still left to be discovered that will allow you to further customize your new powers. We wanted to give you some additional info on how these new status effects will hinder your opponents. This is not info the Vanguard would tell you. First up, we learn a bit more about Stasis Slow. Against combatants, Slow will shut off combatants' movement abilities and slow their overall movement. And when used against players, the Slow will reduce movement speed, reduce ability regeneration rates, suppress movement abilities like jump and dodge, and reduce the following weapon stats: ADS speed, ADS movement speed, weapon reload speed, weapon handling, and weapon kick direction. It also reduces overall weapon accuracy. So if you notice that when you get hit with some of those slowing effects before you get fully frozen in stasis, that, your entire character feels awful. Yeah, turns out that's on purpose, and this is why. And honestly, this is one of the things that I hope they tune first, because if anybody out there has played even a little bit of PvP, if you've even thought about jumping into PvP, it is a mess right now with all the stasis abilities. They are clearly out of balance when it comes to a player versus player environment. And given the fact that enemies don't experience, all of this suppression of abilities and jumps and all that kind of stuff, I think maybe Bungie could stand to tune the effect against players down just a little bit. I think that'd be a great benefit for both PvE and PvP. But moving on, we also learn about how Stasis Freeze affects opponents as well as other players. And here are those details. Against all targets, Freeze can be shattered by damage. Shattering a Freeze causes it to do AoE damage to the frozen target and all other nearby targets, including other frozen targets. Freeze will last for some duration before crumbling off, and unlike shattering, a freeze that crumbles does not do any damage to the frozen enemy or nearby enemies. And of course, this is just explaining a bit more about how stasis works. When you freeze enemies, you basically shatter them, and it does kind of like an AoE around them that will destroy other frozen enemies, causing a shatter effect on them as well. It's really actually pretty cool. What I will say is that when you let the freeze crumble off, it not dealing damage to enemies, it's a little bit weird to me that that's the case for enemies, but like when you're a player who's frozen, again, you gotta hold the button to break out of the ice, which I think could probably be changed to maybe a button mash kind of mechanic, allowing you to break out a little bit faster. That's definitely going to be something we talk about in just a little bit. But they also probably should tune the amount of damage players receive when breaking out of their own stasis encrusted freeze. Again, we'll talk about that in just a bit. But alright, here's how freezing works against enemy combatants. This is PvE enemies. Freeze will lock all non-boss combatants in place for the duration of the effect, and bosses will automatically shatter out after some duration. But against players, Freeze will lock players into place when applied for the duration of the effect. While frozen, players will have their class ability replaced with a new breakout ability that allows players to exit their freeze early at the trade-off of health. The damage this breakout does can be reduced by the resilience stat. The more resilience, the less damage you take. and players can activate their supers to immediately break out of the super state. I like the last thing there. I like being able to use your super, basically flooding yourself with light to break out of the freeze state. But the thing above it is probably one of the most annoying things about Beyond Light right now. As a player, it's so easy to get frozen, whether you're playing in PvE or PvP, and it's such a cost to break out of it. If you don't break out of it in PvP, you're dead anyway, because somebody's going to come up and just clap you with a shotgun like Duality or something. In PvE, you're just going to get surrounded and slapped by every enemy in the room. If you break out of it, you sacrifice a significant chunk of your health. And yeah, I guess you can reduce that with resilience, but I think right now, the amount of health you lose when breaking out of stuff is just a little bit too high. Definitely something they could probably tune. Alright, next up is how freeze works against players and roaming supers. It locks players in place until broken out, and players will quickly shatter out and take a small amount of damage. Against one-off supers, so stuff like Nova Bomb, suppresses super and locks players in place until broken out or expires. All player freeze rules apply here, and that also really doesn't feel great. If you're using something like Nova Bomb and you just jump into the air and immediately get frozen because somebody drops a grenade at your feet or shoots a ice melee or something at you, or good lord, if you've unlocked the Arc Bolt, the Frost Bolt grenade, it's just ridiculous right now. Feels really bad to completely lose your super and be suppressed like that. Hopefully that's something they tune in the future. Anyways, they finish the section up by saying Stasis is a new damage type, and we're excited to see how Guardians harness this new power. As always, we are monitoring community feedback and checking analytics data to consider for future tuning of the sandbox. And there we go. That's pretty much it for the biggest bits of news contained in this week's TWAB. And while I think, it's nice to learn about some of the things with Stasis there, I didn't know resilience could reduce the amount of damage you pick up from breaking out of ice. I didn't know popping your super could break you out of ice. That's cool. Really cool. But there are still some growing pains, I think, when it comes to Stasis. Again, like I said earlier, step into the Crucible right now as a non-Stasis subclass and just watch in horror as everything you do is destroyed because you're frozen so quickly. It suppresses you. If you get frozen, it's basically an insta-kill, and there's a lot of that kind of spam going on right now. Hopefully, well, it looks kind of to me like Bungie either didn't do much testing in Crucible, which I can't imagine would be the case, or just decided, look, it's gonna be busted for a while. We're just gonna have to fix it on the fly, Bethesda style, by letting the players kind of test this out with an official release. Either way, Crucible is definitely a mess right now, and that's not even considering the other broken stuff like how Rose was still a 150 when the update came out. They had to disable that, and then everybody jumped over to Witherhoard because that thing was basically one-shotting people in Crucible for some strange reason, so they went ahead and disabled that. There's definitely a lot to fix here. I've enjoyed my time on Beyond Light so far. I think it's been a pretty good expansion. The story was alright. I'm really interested in the Clovis Bray stuff. Can't wait for the raid. One of the biggest complaints I do have to say is something I talked quite a lot about before Beyond Light came out, and that was the notion of sunsetting. As of right now, with Destiny 2 Beyond Light, we have lost about 75.5% of the weapon collection that we had. Meaning stuff that you can't bring above around 1060 power. And because of that, the loot pool in Beyond Light feels incredibly sparse. If you're still going through the story, you might not be noticing it too much, but if you're post-campaign, you're doing your weekly powerful grind and all that kind of stuff, you're going to notice a lot of the same old gear we've been grinding for a while, popping right back up with very few new guns. This is not a great feeling, and I think it's far too big of a sacrifice just to get us off of some of the pinnacle weapons of the past, just to get you to stop using stuff like Revoker and Mountaintop. I said it before, I will say it again, I think a better solution would have been to tune outliers like the Mountaintop and then introduce new weapons with new perks that were unavailable on those pinnacle weapons that we were using. Brand new good stuff. Some of the new rocket launchers have this awesome ability, like they've got built-in tracking and they've got this awesome ability that basically kind of acts like Firefly. Every enemy killed by that rocket when it detonates turns into a mini explosion. It's fantastic. That's how you get me off of old stuff. You present new stuff that's worthwhile. And I think this sunsetting of, again, over 75% of the game's loot has really not panned out well. Again, we're in the first week of this release. Maybe Bungie's going to surprise us when Season of the Hunt officially starts next week with a bunch of brand new weapons to kind of fill in the gap there. That's a pretty big gap to fill, and I don't think that's going to happen. And I think this idea of sunsetting a lot of the loot that we've been gathering over the last couple of years, only to have us regrind some of the old loot that we used to have, except in a much smaller world pool, doesn't really feel very good. But either way, I'm still playing Beyond Light. I'm enjoying it for the most part, but I do have some complaints, and I'm sure you do too. So be sure to let me know how you feel about this expansion down in the comment section below. But alright, I've dragged this video out more than long enough. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. But I'm out for now. There are plenty more secrets to uncover in the frozen landscapes of Europa, as it were. So as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians stay frosty, and we'll see you out there.